Shabbat Shalom and good morning. This week we are in the Torah portion of Shallah, which is Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 through 17, verse 16. And this is a jam-packed portion. So I'm really excited to share some of the things that I found this morning while I was reading it. And I want to start with reading chapter 14, verse 1. And it says, Yahweh said to Moshe, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea." And this struck me because he actually told them to turn around. And I'd never noticed this before, but if you keep reading, it says in verse 3, "Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them." So this is kind of a ruse against Pharaoh. It says in verse 4, "Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh." And so Yahweh is tricking Pharaoh here, and it's essentially like baiting him. This is kind of the feeling that I get, because the people were going, they turned around. What I love here at the end of verse 4, it says, "And they did so." Unfortunately, we don't quite see this level of obedience for the rest of the Torah portion. We kind of see the typical Israel where they grumble and complain. But in this case, they do what Yahweh has said. And I think what's happened is they're just still in shock that they're away from Egypt, and they go. They go where they're told to go. Now, if you remember a couple portions ago, we were discussing the difference between hardening Pharaoh's heart and stiffening Pharaoh's heart, and how sometimes it was one, sometimes it was the other. In this case, it's stiffen, which is the Hebrew word chazak, which means strengthen, prevail, or fasten upon. So it's like Pharaoh, his heart is strengthened, he's fastened upon this goal, which is to chase down the Israelites and get them back. And of course, this is going to lead to the final great wonder, which is the crossing of the sea, and the sea coming over and killing Pharaoh and his army. Now, this, where it says God will gain glory, or Yahweh will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his hosts, I looked this up, and the Hebrew words here is interesting because it could be both good or bad. So gain glory, the words here in Hebrew actually mean to be heavy or to be weighty, to be grievous, be honorable, or be glorious, or be burdensome. So these are all the potential meanings of the single word for glory. And so I'm suspecting that perhaps what's happening is this is bad for the Egyptians. So the Egyptians see the glory of God in the heavy and the weighty, but Israel sees it in the good way. They see the glory and the honor of Yahweh. So it's a dual revelation of Yahweh gaining glory. Now in verse 5, we're back in Egypt, and it says, "When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, 'What is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service?'" And I thought this was interesting because I don't remember Pharaoh referring them to Israel at all before this point. It's always been the Hebrews or the people. But here he's actually stating Israel. And so I found that interesting and significant. I'm not quite exactly sure what it means. Is he actually acknowledging that they're a nation? Is there something else hidden in the text that I haven't been able to uncover yet? I don't know. But I found it interesting that he's referring to them as Israel. Now, it says here in verse 8 that Yahweh has stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, who's giving chase to the Israelites, as the Israelites were departing defiantly. Now, this sounds like they're kind of prideful, they're defiant, like, "Ooh, you Egyptians, we've left, blah, blah, blah." But I looked it up, and the word here actually means high hand. Well, high hand is how King James Version has translated it, but it's actually not so far away, because there's actually two words here in Hebrew. One means to rise, or to rise up, or exalted, and the other is hand. And if you read the Strong's definition, it says, in the sense of an open hand, it means power, means or direction. So I think it's more than just they're leaving defiantly. I think what it is that they're showing um, the power that they have, right? And of course, this power is through Yahweh. Maybe I don't know, maybe they're not totally um, giving it to Yahweh at this point. We'll see a similar phraseology a bit later in this portion. So we'll return to it and talk a little bit more about it. Now in chapter 14, verse 12, I've read this verse before and I've kind of wondered about it before. But this is what's happening when the Egyptians are coming, the Israelites see them, they're scared now. And they say to Moshe, "Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians'? For it's better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Why in the world would it be better for them to be under slavery than to die? I'm just not sure about this thought process. Maybe it was because they were really well treated in Egypt until the last, the last time period when Moshe was trying to get them to go and they had to find their own straw and they were working harder. But later in this portion, you do see, we've eaten in front of the pots, had our fill of meat in Egypt, etc. But it just seems so interesting and kind of sad to me that they would rather be in slavery than die. And you see a lot of people these days that are dying for important causes that would rather die for a cause than to go to jail for it, which could be seen as imprisonment or slavery. So I found this very interesting that this is the attitude that the Israelites have. But then again, it's not so surprising once we read the whole story and we see the whole history. Now, this is the interesting thing. What happens is that the crossing is actually happening in the early hours of the day before it's light out, because you can read in verse 27, Moshe held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state. So this is after the waters have already came back and killed the Egyptians, and so the sea is normal again at daybreak. So all this is happening in the nighttime. And if you remember, they had the cloud or the pillar of fire by night to guide them. And in this case, instead of going before them, it actually went behind them to protect them. It went between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And this is all happening at night. I'd never actually had imagined it that way before, and I've seen paintings and depictions before of the crossing of the Red Sea, and all the ones I've seen so far are during the day. So it was interesting to imagine and to picture this happening at night. And by the time daybreak arrives, everything looks normal again. The sea is calm. And I looked up this word wall because the sea, it kept being described as a wall to Israel's left and to their right. And like I've said before, I'm not a scholar in Hebrew. I'm still just trying to learn. But when I looked up the word here in Strong's, the word is komah, and it says that the origin is an active participle of an unused root, apparently meaning to join. And then it says a wall of protection. And so this word join here had me thinking all sorts of things. It made me think about Judah and Ephraim being joined. It made me think about Israel being joined to Yahweh. And so I'm not sure if there's something more there in that sense, but it was definitely interesting to think about. If you have any other ideas, I'd love to hear them. Now, it also, when it speaks of this, it says that Yahweh has delivered Israel, or has delivered the people. And the Hebrew word for delivered there is yasha, to save, delivered, free, avenge, and preserve. And so I like all of the various different meanings here, because it's not just that he saved them, but they're free now. They're completely free from Egypt, completely free from slavery. That is the mirror or the analogy to us being free from sin. In the New Testament especially, we see these phrases of like being slave to sin, or, your master is who you serve, so don't serve sin. And here they've been delivered, and that's exactly what Yahweh does for us through Yeshua. We've been delivered from sin forever. Now in verse 31, I want to read this. So this is after it's all happened. It says, "And when Israel saw the wondrous power which Yahweh had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared Yahweh. They had faith in Yahweh and his servant Moses." Now, in the King James Version, this phrase, wondrous power, is actually translated as great work. In Hebrew, it's two words. It's gadol, yod. And what's very interesting is that it actually, the great has been translated pretty close, but the second word there is hand. And it's the same word that was used as when the Israelites were leaving. So remember back, I was talking about how they're leaving defiantly, and actually what was there was this word for hand, and the open hand meaning power. And so I think it's a little bit, yes, you could say wondrous power, but I think it's deeper than that, right? They're seeing the open hand of Yahweh and the power and the might. And this makes me think of Messiah, because he could be considered and has been called in imagery the right hand of Yahweh. And we know it's the right hand that executes power. That's the powerful hand. And kind of to that point, when it talks about they believed Yahweh, they had faith in Yahweh and his servant Moses. The word for believed here, which is what's said in the King James Version, it's had faith, which is what's in the JPS, which is what I'm using, is aman. And it means support, confirm, be faithful, and uphold. And if you read down further in the Strong's Concordance, it says this verbiage, there's actually another Strong's word. It has different vowel pointers, but it's the same spelling. And it says that version of it was used once in Isaiah when it's talking about going to the right hand. And the specific verbiage is like going to the left hand, going to the right hand. And I found this very, very interesting that I think there's a greater significance here, and it goes back to exactly what I was just talking about with Yeshua being at the right hand of the Father, and in many senses, the right hand of the Father. That's where the power comes from. And so I think that's really what's happening here. Is it's not just simply that the Israelites saw the wondrous power of Yahweh. They're seeing the right hand of Yahweh. They're seeing Messiah, and they don't even know it yet, but it makes total sense because they've just been delivered. They've just been saved. They've just been released from their slavery. And they see it as just being released from the slavery in Egypt. But there's something much more going on here. It's slavery from, they're being released from the slavery of the sins they were in, serving other gods. And we'll go into that a little bit later in this portion. Now, chapter 15 is the Song of Moshe, and I really love this song. I think I loved it even more this time that I read it than in past times, and I think probably I'm just going to try to memorize this thing and maybe recite it daily as part of my prayer and worship. But I want to read verse 3 to you. It says, Yahweh, the warrior, Yahweh is his name. So they are declaring his name. And if you remember, we talked long ago when we first started these portions about the name being more than just a name. It's the person's character. It's who they are. These people are declaring that Yahweh is Yahweh. And I find it so sad that today there are some people that just don't use his name, whether it's because they don't know it, which is really sad, or because they feel that out of respect they shouldn't use it. But if we don't use his name, we kind of forget a little bit who he is. By declaring his name, we're declaring who he is, so we should use it. And there's a lot of argument about how do you say it, how do you pronounce it. The truth is we don't know. I don't think he's going to punish us if we get it wrong out of ignorance because we're trying. I'm not God, so maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of how I go through life. I'm doing the best that I can. If I do something wrong out of ignorance, if I realize it, then he will. That was my dog, not me. If I realize it, then he'll forgive. And there is a psalm that actually asks Yahweh to cleanse me of my unknown faults. And I think this is a perfect example. If for some reason we're saying it wrong, he'll cleanse us of that if we ask. Now in verse 13, it says, in your love you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength you guide them to your holy abode. Now this is really where it's starting to get deep. Redeemed, the people you redeemed. I looked up the Hebrew word here, and the Strong's definition contains something that says act as a kinsman redeemer. I love this. Now, I've heard a lot of teachings from Rico Cortez where he talks about the kinsman redeemer and the significance of this, but if you remember from various portions of Torah and even the prophets, Ruth is a great example. The kinsman redeemer is the person who essentially will propagate the name of his brother. If the brother had a wife and then the brother died and they didn't have children, he then would come and marry that woman so that he could propagate the seed of his brother, and the first child would actually belong to the brother and be under the brother's name. The kinsman redeemer also would more or less save somebody if the year of the Jubilee came and the person couldn't buy back their land. A kinsman redeemer could do it for them. And so I find it interesting that here in this Song of Moshe, they're using that terminology to describe Yahweh. But if you just read it in the English, in your love you lead the people you redeemed, you don't get that deeper meaning. Now, in the second part of that verse, it says, you're guiding the people to your holy abode. This makes me think of the tabernacle. And at the end of the song, verses 17 through 18, there's more really strong tabernacle language. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made me to dwell in, O Yahweh. The sanctuary, O Yahweh, which your hands established, Yahweh will reign forever and ever. They don't know yet that he's going to tell them to build a tabernacle in the wilderness. Of course, what we see is that becomes the entire point of being in the wilderness. Leviticus and Deuteronomy is all about building the tabernacle. Moshe gets this incredibly lengthy vision about exactly how to make it. And so there's prophecy here in this song that they're singing just after they cross the sea. That's talking all about the whole reason why they're supposed to be in the wilderness is to meet Yahweh there, to dwell in his presence, in his tabernacle. Now in verse 14 through 16, this is something a little bit different. It says, the peoples hear, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed, the tribes of Moab. Trembling grips them. All the dwellers of Canaan are aghast. So here they're kind of like saying, all these people, they're afraid of them, they're aghast, they're afraid of us, we kind of have the upper hand. But then you see that really quickly go away, especially when they're supposed to scope out the land. They're scared of the people there. I guess it's easy to be really, pumped up and excited and nothing, you just saw your enemies drowned in the sea. It's just sad that they lost this later on. And so that's just something I wanted to point out with this song. Now it's interesting, the Song of Moshe, if you remember back, forward, I guess we should say, to the book of Revelation. I just want to read something to you, Revelation 15, verse 3. This is when John has the vision of essentially the people who prevailed over the beast of prey and over its image. And it says, they sing the song of Moshe, the servant of Elohim, and the song of the Lamb. And so, hearkening back to this idea of seeing the right hand, the open hand, the hand of power, and now connecting this to the future when they're going to sing the song of Moshe and the song of the Lamb. We know the Lamb is Messiah, the right hand, the hand of power. And so this is a really interesting, beautiful circle connection back. I always wondered why they would be singing the song of Moshe at the end of days. But I think I'm starting to see it now and understand that a little better, because it's about more than just being saved from Egypt. It's talking about the ultimate goal, which is to dwell with Yahweh, to be in his abode, to establish his tabernacle in his abode. And at the end of days, we are going to be truly in his presence, which is the point of the tabernacle, is to be able to dwell with him and to be in his presence. And so now it makes way more sense to me as to why they're singing this at the end of days. And I think this is why now the Song of Moshe means a lot more to me, why I love it more, and why I kind of want to memorize it and keep it in my heart. This portion was pretty jam-packed with new revelation for me, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And as always, if you have any further thoughts, comments, contributions, please feel free to put that in the comment section. Shabbat Shalom.